Well, good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome or welcome back, as the case might be. My name is Dalibor Petrovic, your host to these Tectonic conversations. Today, I'm thrilled to be joined by my friend and colleague, David Shapiro. Dave, thank you very much for your time.
Thanks for having me back.
Thank you, David. Um, so, what we wanted to do is to create a series of live webcast episodes to explore the topic of post-labor economics in more detail. And knowing that David has just completed writing the manuscript of his new book called The Great Decoupling, we thought it would be great to actually go and follow the structure of that book that delves deeply into the topic of post-labor economics. So what we are going to do is over the next couple of months, we are going to organize and deliver 6 episodes like this, focusing on each one of the 6 parts of this master volume, should I call it, The Great Decoupling. So this session today, the first one in the series, is going to focus on part 1, which is the rise of automation. But of course, because this is the first episode, we're going to actually start with the big picture. And I'm going to ask David to explain to us, for someone who is hearing the concept of post-labor economics for the first time, what is it, and why is it important, and why should someone who is not an economist think about it and learn about it and get involved? So, Dave, over to you.
Yeah, great first question. The simplest definition of post-labor economics that I use is we are seeing an ongoing decoupling of economic productivity from human labor inputs. In simpler terms, GDP goes up, wages go down. And we have actually seen this trend pretty much since the 1950s, and it's only continuing to accelerate due to additional layers of automation. Now, the book that I've just completed, it needs a little bit of polishing and refinement, but the book asks and answers two fundamental questions. One is, how do we make ends meet if our jobs get automated away?
Yeah.
Now, it doesn't have to be 100% of jobs getting automated away. It could be 40%, it could be 50, 60, 80%. But imagine if we had an unemployment level of 40% rather than 4.5% that we have today. The second question that it asks and answers is, how do we keep society balanced if labor loses that much power? Because labor is part of our social contract today. So that is post-labor economics at a very, very high level.
Yeah, excellent. So how are we going to structure this episode today? Is we're going to go through some very basic questions to answer, for those who might be getting introduced to this topic for the very first time. Then in the next part, we're going to go through the 7 chapters of the part 1 of the book. And then we're going to reserve a more expert level questions for the end. Is that fair?
Yep, let's do it.
Let's do that. So, you compare, one of the basic premises of post-labor economics is that, yes, of course, we are going through industrial revolutions, we are inventing technology, deploying technology, but this time things are going to be different. Can you maybe start by reflecting why why is that the case? Why do you feel that this time things are going to be different? And maybe reflect on how have societies in the past handled major technological disruptions?
Yeah. So in a word, the reason that this time is different is because we're working towards what Sam Altman said is intelligence too cheap to meter, or if you want to put it in more objective terms, cognitive hyperabundance. Now that sounds like a mouthful, but basically what we're looking at is we're presently in a knowledge work economy or a service-based economy. And what we're working on automating right now with the help of artificial intelligence, like LLMs, but other kinds of artificial intelligence as well, is basically automating away the need for human cognitive labor. It's going to be better, faster, cheaper, and safer than humans. And in many cases, it already is. There was a news report just the other day that said 40% of Americans trust chatbots, AI chatbots, for medical advice now.
Yeah.
That has ramped up far faster than many people would have predicted. And by the way, those AIs are only going to get better from here. So that's the key thing that's different. Whereas automation in the past was not general purpose and was not as flexible as humans are. Now remember, those same chatbots that are able to write code, it's the same exact technology that's also able to diagnose medical conditions, help you plan to build a house, replace consultants and writers and those sorts of things. So it is the perfect general purpose technology, and it's only continuing to improve. And that's the primary thing that's different this time around from
Yeah.
previous industrial revolutions.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Now, in the previous industrial revolutions, what we know has happened is what is often referred to as creative destruction, as in old industries wither and go away, but new industries emerge, and then people who are displaced in all industries, the theory goes, that's the destruction part, find their happiness in those new industries. That's the creative part of the creative disruption. Now, the post-labor economic system or theory suggests that this might not be the case this time around. Uh, can you explain that a little bit more?
Yeah, so creative destruction is a term that was coined by Joseph Schumpeter in 1923, I believe. And he was using it to characterize the kind of paradigm shifts that had happened in previous industrial revolutions. We ended up with far few farmers, we ended up with far fewer weavers, those sorts of things. But we ended up with entirely new industries. Steam engines and diesel engines required mechanics and factory line workers and all
Mhm.
kinds of jobs that just simply did not exist before. Likewise, today we have cloud engineers. That's what I used to do. YouTubers. These are jobs that you really could not have described to someone in the year 1900. There was too many layers of technology between what they knew, because they didn't even have radio broadcasts back then. So there weren't radio hosts in 1900. Or maybe there were, but there were very few.
Yeah.
So you had to build up several layers of these new emergent capabilities that technology allowed for those new entire job sectors to be created. So the idea is technology, yes, it out with the old and with the new. It creates entirely new things that you just can't predict more than a couple decades into the future. Even back as early as the 1960s and 70s, only the most forward-thinking science fiction even predicted what kind of impact the internet would have on society. But even then, it missed a lot of things, and they
Yeah.
actually underpredicted a lot of things. Some things predicted blogs, but not Twitter, right? So you can kind of guess a few decades ahead, but not a century ahead. So the assumption there is that this pattern of creative destruction always leads to more jobs.
Mhm.
But we'll talk about why that's not always the case in a little bit.
Yeah. So that's a very interesting one because when I speak with people who are, who maybe have not, spent the time that we have spent exploring this issue, say, don't worry. Yes, there will be disruption, but like always, new jobs that we cannot even imagine are going to be, created, and that is going to be saving the day. So I look forward to that exploration. I think that is really, for me, that was like an aha moment when I understand the math and calculation there. Now, we already know that automation continuously is displacing work, and that is happening, of course. That has been happening throughout history. That is happening today. If I was to ask you to share some of the examples of the types of jobs that automation today already is replacing that people might not be thinking of, right? What some of those examples could you come up with?
Yeah, so two of the most public examples that we've seen, some in the data, but often through anecdotes, is number one is copywriters. That's one of the primary use cases of chatbots today is to write,
Mm.
anything from emails to marketing copy, fiction, nonfiction, that sort of thing. But then also call centers, whether it's customer service or marketing or whatever. The combination of realistic human voices and speech to text to speech combined with these general purpose cognitive engines allows you to replace most of your call center staff either with one-to-one, so digital, robot callers, or just moving your customers over to chatbots, which is kind of the native format of these AIs.
Mm.
So those are two examples. Now, when you look at the data, there's also been a huge number of layoffs this year. Depending on who you ask, there's about 80 to 100,000 layoffs just in the tech sector alone due to AI. However, some of the math that I've looked at, when you look at the changes in, for instance, payrolls versus corporate income, you actually probably can find evidence that there's even more layoffs, and that could be overseas workers, contractors, and that sort of thing. Up to 500,000 people this year alone in America alone have potentially been laid off either directly due to AI or due to the downstream impacts of artificial intelligence being integrated into Fortune 500 companies.
Yeah.
So when you put all of that together, you say, okay, there's quite a bit going on here, and it's not always obvious exactly how big the impact is just yet.
And I actually watched your YouTube video on that explanation of how you derived to the number of 500,000 displacements already. And just for posterity, we are recording this in August 2025. So this is like the effect of the first 7 months of this year. In other words, the impact is real. And I think that a lot of people either explicitly or implicitly, intuitively feel that something is going on here that is different. And I think this is the reason why there is an increasing number of individuals who are like starting to pay attention to the conversation that you are leading. So now what we're going to do, let's now go and unpack the actual book. And let's start with the details of the chapter one, which is called The Rise of Automation, right? Now, this
Yep.
chapter one, this part one, is broken into 7 components. And what we're going to do is we're going to delve into each one to, yes, to start building the story. So David, let's start with the very beginning. Let's start about with like what is this part one intended to do? What are the key messages of the part one? And then let's start with the epochal shifts.
Yeah. So the rise of automation, if you're going to talk about post-labor economics, the very first ingredient that you need to have is you need to demonstrate that automation will be sufficient to subsume human labor. So that's the fundamental purpose of this first part of the book, is just to show the history of automation. And the reason that we're starting with, the long history of automation, basically starting with the printing press, moving up forward to artificial intelligence today, that's 500 years of history. The reason that we need to do this is to show that automation is not just a chatbot, that automation is many, many technologies. And there's also another class of technologies that it kind of all fits under, which is general purpose technologies. So you might say, well, artificial intelligence, that's a narrow kind of automation and it can't do everything. Sure, but when you understand that it's a general purpose technology, you understand that you will continue discovering uses for it for many, many years. The
Mhm.
same way that we're still figuring out new uses for the wheel and electricity and the internet. Those are three of the biggest, most transformative general purpose technologies that we've ever come across, other than fire, which you could argue we didn't invent that one, we just kind of discovered that. So the long arc of this part will demonstrate that automation is on the rise, has been on the rise, and will teach the readers or listeners uh, how to understand and how to mentally kind of grasp what it means to reach a saturation point of automation and
Mhm.
ultimately reaching that point of cognitive hyperabundance or intelligence too cheap to meter, so that you really understand that's the chief economic bottleneck that we were currently working on eliminating. And of
Excellent.
course, in
Excellent.
economics, yeah, go ahead.
No, no, I was going to say excellent. This is a great setup. So now let's go start unpacking the story.
Yes. So part one, or section one of part one is epochal shifts.
Yeah.
So many people are kind of anchored in what's called normalcy bias. So normalcy bias is we all have a cognitive preference to just understand the world as we see it today and assume that it's never really going to change. Even when we do live through changes, our brains, because of the way that we evolved, kind of assume that, okay, whatever is the new normal is the permanent new normal. Now, this part goes through the long history of going from agrarian farmers, the invention of the printing press, getting rid of monarchies, those sorts of things, and then up through the first, second, and third industrial revolutions to show that actually we have already lived through, just in the last 500 years, we have lived through no fewer than 3 or 4 full socioeconomic and sociopolitical paradigm shifts, meaning politics changed, economics changed, society changed, due primarily to technology. Now, technology was a forcing function. Many people were quick to point out technology alone does not guarantee that you're going to have a better future. You need policy, you need institutions, and those sorts of things. And I anyone who is anyone agrees, yes, it's not just technology. Technology alone can be disruptive. It's how you implement it, how you regulate it, and how you integrate it into society. At the same time, we can gain a lot of lessons from history by looking at how these technologies, particularly in states or regions that were keen to adopt them and integrate them versus those that were resistant or reluctant.
Yeah.
So one chief example is Tsarist Russia. So in Tsarist Russia, they did not have much incentive to industrialize, so they didn't.
Mm.
The Russian aristocracy simply kind of ignored it and kept their peasants as things were until Russia was in so much worse shape because Russia went from one of the most powerful empires in Europe to one of the weakest in basically a century because they failed to industrialize. So that serves as a historical lesson as you do need to embrace these disruptors and these innovations, even if they do come with the cost of creative destruction.
Yeah.
So that's part one.
That's excellent. As a matter of fact, you can almost contrast the situation that we have now globally with the competition that is unfolding between the United States and China on the AI front. And what you described here with the Tsarist Russia and ultimately it collapsed in 1917. This is, I think, a lesson that people have learned, and now we see this fearless competition that is happening between the United States and China, each trying to outcompete other, each trying to maximize, I think, maximize the impact, positive impact of this to their populations. Now,
Absolutely.
so thank you for that introduction. So now we come to the section two, which is the better, faster, cheaper, and safer. This is really interesting because I think it is here that you mentioned two of these four-word concepts that that light up light bulbs when people first see them in this context. So I'll let you, if you don't mind, explain what you mean by better, faster, cheaper, safer, and what you mean by human capabilities.
Yes. So better, faster, cheaper, safer was a term that I coined when I was kind of trying. This was in the very early days before I even had the name post-labor economics. I was trying to understand what is the criteria, what is the condition under which labor substitution actually occurs.
Hmm.
And the model that I came up with is relatively simple, which is once a machine option or capital more broadly provides the same outcome that a human can provide, but if it crosses those four thresholds, and it often doesn't even need to cross all four, two or three of them will usually do.
Yeah.
But if it's better, faster, cheaper, and safer than a human, generally speaking, a company or a government or a military will choose the machine option or the capital option rather than humans because humans are perishable. And I don't mean like humans will die, but you can't put a human on the shelf. Humans are not shelf stable. You can't just keep it and amateurize them on the books. A machine, however, you can. So when machines cross those four thresholds,
Better,
substitution becomes better,
faster,
faster. Yep.
cheaper, and safer.
Yep.
Those are the four things that machines, when they do one or more of these, a rational player, a rational decision maker would likely prefer a machine to a human.
Yes. There there are a couple of small exceptions, but in the long term, it becomes economically irrational to use regulation or corporate policies that prevent that substitution. In some cases, there's unions have said you need to have a human doing this particular job because we want the human to be doing that job,
Yeah.
even if it's not necessarily economically rational for them to do it.
Yeah.
So that was the first kind of insight that I had to understand, okay, this is actually a good argument because if robots and AI and other forms of capital cross those thresholds, labor substitution becomes inevitable at that point.
Yeah.
So then looking at the supply side, so you can look at labor demand, which
Yeah.
is I want tasks to be done. I don't care by who or by what. So
Yeah.
then you look at the labor supply side and you say, what is it that humans supply to the economy that is economically valuable? And there's four basic food groups that human bodies and human brains can add, and that is strength, dexterity, cognition, and empathy. So strength We started automating away during the first and second and third industrial revolutions with coal, with steam, with electric motors,
Yeah.
batteries, those kinds of things. Human strength has not really been a major bottleneck for quite a long time. And as you pointed out in the very first episode, arguably we started replacing it with beasts of burden before even the first industrial
Yeah.
revolution, just the agricultural revolution. We started using ox and horses and those sorts of things. So we ended up with thermodynamic abundance, where we were able to create an abundance of heat energy and then use that to create mechanical energy. So strength has just not been a economic bottleneck for a long time. We have gigantic dump trucks and huge cranes, those sorts of things, and all you
Yeah.
need to do is push buttons.
Correct.
Dexterity is the next criteria, and so that's fine motor control. That's the ability to assemble circuit boards and make fine stitches and those sorts of things, perform surgery. Dexterity is something that machines have started encroaching upon with industrial robots, but usually they have to work in very controlled environments.
Correct.
However, as robots become more and more sophisticated, so for instance, surgical robots are getting better and more autonomous. Neuralink was able to install brain implants, which of course that's a very delicate surgery, at superhuman levels. So it's a fully automated surgery.
Yeah.
Other surgical robots are able to I think it was last month, fully perform a gallbladder removal. No humans involved whatsoever. So the dexterity is increasing quickly. Then you look at the coordination and dexterity of robots like Tesla's Optimus and others, and there's dozens and dozens of those robots coming into the market. That dexterity is increasing. So we're really right in the middle of seeing dexterity be automated away. It's very slow. It's going to be slower than probably cognition and empathy because the real world has a lot of friction,
Yep.
but it's not a safe harbor for humans forever. Next is cognition. Cognition is creativity, problem solving, those sorts of things, planning. So whether that's writing code, being a chief executive officer, or even being a foreman on a construction site where there's you got to figure out how to get all the wiring and plumbing in and solve problems dynamically. We're already seeing AI models like the GPT-5 that was just released the day before this, we're recording this episode, that are surpassing humans on many cognitive tasks,
Yes.
from planning, coding, uh, uh, I mean, medical diagnosis, all sorts of things. And so when we look at that trend, we say, okay, cognition is not going to be a differentiating factor for human labor arbitrage before too long, meaning that yes, it's not that humans are going to become dumber, it's that the machines are going to be so much smarter than us and so much cheaper and faster that it's just not going to be reasonable to have a human if and when the AIs are able to replace that. And so the last bastion of where humans add value, which is on the labor demand side or labor supply side, is empathy. So empathy is the
Yeah.
root of communication, trust, authenticity, those sorts of things. Now, chatbots are already starting to encroach upon empathy. People are using it for companions, people are using it for therapy, and that sort of thing. However, for many humans, there is a durable human preference for other humans.
Yeah.
Live performances. You probably would be less excited to go see a basketball game played by robots than by real humans.
Yeah.
Uh,
Exactly.
Likewise, computers have been better than humans at chess for more than a decade now, but you still prefer to see real humans playing chess against each other because it's an intrinsically human thing.
Yeah.
So while that is the last bastion of where human labor demand is going to be durable, we're not seeing it absorb enough of the labor refugees, is what I'm calling them, people that are trying to escape from losing their job to AI or machines. It is growing, personal coaches, yoga instructors, those sorts of things. Those jobs are growing, but they're not growing faster than the jobs that are being destroyed, than the layoffs are growing. So those are the four primary food groups that we have for the human labor supply side.
Yeah. So in other words, we are bringing to the labor arbitrage, we as humans bring strength, cognition, dexterity, and empathy. And whenever technologies, history has taught us, whenever technologies can do those things faster, better, cheaper, or safer, or combination thereof, the likely scenario is displacement of work. That to me
Yes.
is a very clear, very straightforward, just move, uh, move the movie forward, that's what happens. So now
Right.
what we need to do is we need to figure out how do we deal with this transition that is upon us in a most effective and efficient way, so that and of course many people are betting that there's going to be a creative part of the creative disruption that is going to create work that will pick up those who are, you call them labor refugees, fantastic term. The big question is, if is this going to really happen or not? Will we have the new creative industries to absorb or not? I'm sure we're going to be touching that in future episodes. This now leads us into the fourth industrial revolution, right? This is where we are at today. What are the
Correct.
characteristics of it?
So the fourth industrial revolution, this is a term that was coined by Klaus Schwab of the World Economic Forum in 2016, I believe. So the primary characteristics of the fourth industrial revolution, and this is another thing that's different. In the past, each industrial revolution was characterized by the confluence of a handful of technologies: steam power, some mechanical engineering,
Yeah,
electricity. You know, again, these are not trivial technologies, but it was only a handful of technologies. What we're seeing in the fourth industrial revolution is the confluence of numerous technologies. It's not just artificial intelligence, it's also biotech,
yeah,
quantum computing, nuclear fusion, solar energy, and all of these other technologies, photonic computing. All of them are coalescing around the same time. And beyond that, they also create a positive feedback loop where the better that artificial intelligence gets, the more that it helps literally every other technology. So I personally characterize artificial intelligence as kind of the keystone technology of the fourth industrial revolution because it's very power hungry. So that power hunger is
yeah,
drawing demand for more solar, more nuclear plants, fusion plants eventually. Those are the kind of knock-on effects that artificial intelligence is driving. But artificial intelligence is also driving more medical advancement. So we're getting more biotech because of the acceleration that artificial intelligence is creating. And then to those geopolitical concerns that you mentioned between the US and China, acceleration is not just what's happening due to compounding returns, it is the de facto geopolitical optimal strategy where, some people disagree with characterizing it as a new Cold War, but it is certainly a geopolitical contest
yeah,
around technology. And so that is why the fourth industrial revolution is very different. Now, the that's kind of the rosy picture. The darker side of calling it an industrial revolution, and if indeed it is the next industrial revolution, is that every previous industrial revolution came part and parcel with huge amounts of social disruption, whether it was jobs or changes to the economy. Robber barons, for instance, during the third industrial revolution, the steel and oil tycoons that were able to consolidate monopolies.
yeah,
That was an example of a downside. The rise of factories and children working 16-hour days and getting maimed by machines and having no legal recourse to sue the owners of the factory. These are all kind of the dark side of these industrial revolutions, and this is one of the things that many people express when they have anxiety. They say, "Okay, I'm starting to feel that there's a lot of big changes coming, and it's not just one or two little things.
yeah,
We're seeing a seismic shift, hence tectonic talks. We're seeing a seismic shift in the way that life is going to be conducted and that business is going to be conducted, and it's going to be all encompassing.
yeah,
And when you have these all encompassing changes, it can get really messy. And that's the entire motivation for writing this book and doing this research is how best can we navigate these choppy waters?
yeah. You're absolutely right. The big difference in the fourth industrial revolution is that information technology was the grandmother that gave birth to daughter technologies, and now there are granddaughter technologies that touch everything from space tech to robotics to biology, chemistry, physics. Like this is proliferation of everywhere, or as you call it, the spread in all directions, right?
Yes. Yeah, so when you look at the impact of these technologies, there's two primary terms from economics and history. So one is spillover effects, and that is where you have a technology that has many knock-on effects, some that you can anticipate, some that you can't. And then another example is network effects. So a network effect is when you get a technology past the threshold of usefulness and it starts getting integrated everywhere.
Hmm.
So things like radio waves. When the radio was first invented by Nikola Tesla more than a century ago, uh, people said, well, what is this used for? It was good for, one-way communication, but you don't necessarily realize that everything from Wi-Fi to Bluetooth to 5G, that's all fundamentally the same technology. And it's become more and more useful over time as that technology becomes more and more sophisticated. Digital broadcast TV, Starlink, all of these technologies are all downstream of that original progenitor technology. And so then when you take a step back and you say, okay, let me not just look at chatbots because chatbots are just one subsidiary of, a downstream effect of computers and internet. When you look at all of the impacts that all of AI and machine learning and that class of automation is having, it has already infiltrated literally every market segment and every sector of the economy, from construction to law to healthcare to military, government, and everything in between. Artificial intelligence is already having a profound impact, and the uptake has been much faster than any previous technology as well. So that the section spread in all directions really kind of comes from that kind of it's spreading like wildfire. That's kind of the image that I
Yeah.
was thinking of when I added that section is actually, just on the face of it, just looking at ChatGPT, which has 700 million daily users already,
Yeah.
even though it's only 3 years old, uh, that is already spreading like wildfire. But computer vision, speech to text, image generators, and things other than chatbots already being implemented everywhere. And at the same time, this is one of the key characteristics of general purpose technologies, is the technology improves internally. So in the same way that the original radios were all analog and then they were digital and then they were carrying video and now they're carrying encryption and all kinds of other things, artificial intelligence in all of its categories is also continuously improving. So that means that we're getting more and more spillover effects.
Yeah.
Those are when, like, for instance, when NASA invented microwaves, as we know them today, we found a lot of uses for microwaves, from communication to reheating hot dogs. Uh, so then you end up with network effects because the utility goes up, meaning it's more useful, and the price goes down, and suddenly a whole bunch of other sectors that didn't really have a use for that technology now use it. The same thing happened with electricity when it was first invented. It was really expensive. You needed to have a dirty
Yeah.
coal burning powerhouse local, and it mostly ran big motors for factories, lights, and fans. That was good. But once we were producing more electricity for cheaper, we found more uses for it. And so people are often familiar with the term Jevons paradox, which is the more you create of something, the more uses you find for it because it gets more useful, it gets cheaper, it gets more abundant. In this case, it also improves because it's not just the base technology, there's the downstream technologies.
Yeah.
So spread in all directions, it's a tsunami that has already hit us. We just didn't realize it
And
at first.
so here is an interesting observation and thought. You talk about better, faster, cheaper, and safer. And when a technology does technically either one of those, but especially multiple of those, then it is most likely going to replace human version of that. That is less fast and so forth. I think that where we are at now is that like faster and cheaper, check. Better is the question, and safer is a big question. But
Yes.
I think that what is happening right now is that the better gap is shrinking quickly. And in many, many, many fields, that better has also been checked, right? So
I
we
would
already
agree.
have, right, we now have de facto cheaper, unquestionably faster, not necessarily better everywhere, but getting better a lot very, very quickly. And then safer is, I think, another angst that many organizations and people still have, privacy. How is this gonna, am I disclosing too much? Where is this gonna be stored? And like, there is a big safety concern. So I think that I would project that over the next little while, the better gap is gonna be shrinking across all endeavors, and then the safety will also be eventually shrinking, and then I think we are we are facing a very, very unknown circumstance. Hence the work that you are doing here. Hence the work, uh, preparing the society to really understand the fundamental dynamics that are causing this. But your work, unlike many of other futurists, actually includes solutions. And that is, I think, the beauty and important part. So can't wait to get to that episode. Now, after you set up this stage so powerfully, many people will say, well, hold on for a second. Yeah, don't be alarmist. This is, it's going to work out fine. There'll be new industries. The Luddite fallacy. Can you explain a little bit what that is?
Yeah, so the Luddite fallacy is an age-old idea that technology will destroy jobs and the jobs are gone forever. That was the argument of the Luddites that sabotaged farm equipment during the early industrial revolutions. Now, I could not possibly propose this framework without addressing this
Yeah.
idea, this fear, because I'm essentially saying that the Luddite fallacy is true, that we will eliminate the need or demand for human labor for all time, at least a significant portion of human labor, to the point that there's going to be a non-trivial segment of the population, 40%. I personally predict much more than 40% will just not really have a way to make money in the way that we understand it today, not through a wage labor contract. So to make that argument, we have to look at the fact that one, when you have the kind of the truism that has emerged that technology always creates new jobs, technology destroys jobs, and
Yeah.
it doesn't. Technology has rarely actually created new jobs, with a couple of exceptions when it enables new platforms. However, what technology really does is technology is deflationary, meaning that it makes goods and services for cheaper. And that liberates more capital and therefore more time and labor, or wherever you want to spend that capital, that money, to do other things. Using farming as a primary example, in the year 1800, 75% to 90% of Americans were farmers. And
Yeah.
that's because farming was so inefficient that you could only produce a few surplus calories per every hour of farming that you didn't need to eat yourself. So, therefore, in order to support a society, most people had to produce food. However, with the first, second, and third industrial revolutions, farming became more and more efficient until in 1900, it was 40% of Americans were farmers, and today it's only 2%. So this is the kind of thing where farming has become so much more efficient that only a tiny fraction of the same number of people need to do farming today to feed an even larger population. It has become so much more efficient. That freed up a tremendous amount of time and energy of humans to do other things,
Yeah.
like go to school and invent electricity and radios and those sorts of things. Didn't invent electricity, harness electricity.
Yeah.
However, none of that actually says new jobs are always automatic. There's no economic law, there's no first principle of physics that say new jobs are automatically entailed by this deflationary pressure.
Yeah.
Everyone agrees that technology is deflationary. That's why we do it. It reduces costs. However, there is no intrinsic demand for those new goods and services that we want to be rendered by humans. There's no, unless there is a durable demand side to say, I really want a human doing this job, eventually you'll say, why have a human doing that job? And you might say, well, what about massage therapists? There's already robotic massage machines out there that some people really, really like, or concierge, or, butlers and those sorts of things. Many of those jobs that you think would be intrinsically human, plenty of people would prefer to have a robot doing them.
Yeah.
So then when you look at, okay, if you eliminate everything that does not have an intrinsic component, an intrinsic human component, there's very few jobs left. And so the one way to look at this is we've gone through three primary workforce paradigms. So first was the agricultural revolution. So most people were farmers in some capacity. The next paradigm was manufacturing, which was using dexterity
Yeah.
to create goods or
Mhm.
render services, which is on its way out in the most advanced economies. And now we're in a knowledge-based economy, which is primarily predicated on human cognition. However, as we already established, if cognition is about to be subsumed by machines, Then the last or the next fourth paradigm is going to be an attention-based economy or a meaning or experience-based economy, which is
Yeah.
based on that authenticity, that empathy. So if you want to go to a concert, you probably don't want to see a hologram of your favorite band. You want to see your favorite band on stage.
Yeah.
Otherwise, you're just listening to a recording. Likewise, if you want to go to a sporting events or a comedian, those kinds of things. However, we probably will not need that many comedians or that many football stars or that many chess players.
Yeah.
And the reason is because human attention is scarce. There's only people only spend, 6 to 8 hours paying attention to things other than themselves in their homes at any given day. So with that as the primary scarcity, we're not really going to see even the ability to demand that much human labor in the future. So the math just really doesn't work out.
Yeah.
Again, some of these jobs will stick around forever. My personal gut instinct after looking at all this for the last few years is we'll probably have an employment rate of about 20% in the
Yeah.
future. Meaning for everyone who wants a job, only 20% of those, so 1 out of 5 will actually find a job.
Yeah.
Uh, Again, gut instinct, the time horizon is maybe, in the next 20 years.
Yeah. But it's important to say that what you mentioned now, 20% would be jobs, employment. You're not talking about individuals who are entrepreneurs, individuals who participate in gig economy or contracting, but I'm going to assume this is the category of an actual employment, people getting monthly paychecks in exchange for their work, right? That's what you're referring to.
Yeah, I would include a lot of gig and solopreneur work in
You,
that. So like
you would.
content creators. Yeah, so like content creators and here's where the numbers are actually kind of abysmal. And I want to reiterate what you said because I fully agree. I am very optimistic. I think that we can create a system that will still be good for everyone, but what we have to illustrate is why the current system will not work.
Yeah.
So for people trying to get into the creator economy, the attention economy, for instance, most of them don't make much money. The average YouTube channel makes less than $100 a month. That's not enough to live on.
Yeah.
The average creator on OnlyFans makes less than $200 a month. Again, not enough to live on. And so, many writers, many comedians, most of them are starving artists, and they need to work at coffee shops to make ends meet while they're pursuing their dreams. So there is not evidence that even at today's level that we're able to absorb that. Now, the one caveat or exception there is what's called Balmos-Cost disease. So
Hmm.
Balmos-Cost disease is a principle that shows that when you have an inelastic demand or a task that is low productivity and scales poorly, then the price of that service or good tends to go up much faster as the rest of the economy goes up because demand shifts to that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Education and healthcare are the two primary things that we've seen over the last 2 decades, where you see the
Yep.
cost of university education going up very quickly
Yep.
because you can't just copy paste professors, although we can now with artificial intelligence. So
Yeah.
that might not be an issue. Likewise, you can't copy paste doctors, and it takes a long time to produce new doctors. So therefore, healthcare has also gone up quite precipitously. So some of those other job categories, it might be that there is increased demand for things like live musicians, comedians, writers, YouTubers, and that sort of thing. But particularly if people are not working, then they're going to have more time to allocate their attention to other things.
Yeah.
But even so, we're not seeing those types of jobs
Yeah.
absorb enough labor refugees
Yeah.
by a wide margin.
Yeah, and in the attention economy, there is only what you said is brilliant. Actually, there is like so obvious that there is only so much attention that a human person has in terms of hours per day that could be productively leveraged for economic reasons, right? There's only so many hours that each of us can dedicate that attention. Now, before we go off this topic, you mentioned better, faster, cheaper, safer. Richard is asking a question. Are these four? In some sense orthogonal in value as and therefore are they sort of independent of each other? How would you? Yeah.
Yeah, so better, faster, cheaper, safer. They are often, in some cases, they are orthogonal, but not entirely. And more often than not, there can be overlap. So, for instance, when you have something that is, for instance, let's just take car motors, for instance, internal combustion engines as a quintessential general purpose technology. For that, you're looking at things like what does it cost to build the engine and maintain it and then fuel it? And then you're looking at its power output. How much energy can it generate? And so then, as that technology improves, it becomes better, faster, and cheaper all in one go. It
Yeah.
doesn't necessarily become safer. In fact, it becomes less safe the more power you
Yeah.
have. So then you
Right.
need other systems built onto it, like crash prevention and safety belts and those sorts of things. You need the rest of the car around the engine to make it safer. And in particular, if you ever look up historical photos, car accidents of the 50s and 60s, the entire car crumpled like a can because they were not built the same way that they're built today. They're built with much sturdier frames and other safety mechanisms like airbags that make them far more survivable. So the safety component is often, not always, but often the most orthogonal uh, uh, to the other. Now, in the case of artificial intelligence, it's often a requirement. So here's what I mean. Whenever a military contract says we want a new device or software that does X, Y, and Z, and it needs to do it exactly right every single time, and if we hit the kill switch, it needs to switch off immediately. Because of those requirements, which many people are worried about Skynet and Terminator and those sorts of things, because the military has such stringent requirements around controllability, safety is actually a feature, not just something that is, a tangent or a side benefit. It is actually
Yeah.
directly baked into the product and the service as it's being built. Likewise, for humanoid robots, one of the primary ways that these companies are going to get humanoid robots adopted is if they're safe for their children and dogs to be around. You've probably, if you look at some of the videos, they'll have dancing robots, and sometimes the robots fall down and they start flailing wildly. That would be really dangerous if it fell on a 3-year-old and starts, a 25-kilogram robot flails wildly,
Yeah.
puts out your 3-year-old's eye. That company is going to get sued out of existence. So in some cases, safety is intrinsic. It's not orthogonal at all, and it really just depends on the technology or the particular good or service. So the qualified answer is sometimes. Sometimes it's orthogonal, sometimes it's not. You can think
Yeah.
of counterexamples both ways.
These were excellent examples. So David, we've now established that automation, I think, definitely, of course, when it does things better, cheaper, faster, safer, displaces work. You've described the general purpose nature of technology, how it proliferates everywhere, and how it's now already omnipresent everywhere. Is there a ceiling? Like, how smart can it get?
Yeah, so when we take a look at technological progress, one of the first things that people may or may not be familiar with in terms of computers is Moore's law. So Moore's law is not actually a law, but it's an observation that for the last about 120 years, the cost of computation, so however much energy or dollars it costs per machine-based computation, has gone down exponentially. And that's for 12 decades straight, starting with mechanical relays up through vacuum tubes and now transistors. So, and that trend has shown no sign of slowing down. So when you say, okay, well, one of the primary bottlenecks to get to artificial intelligence where it is today was the cost of computation. Some of the deep neural networks, some of the progenitor work that has led to things like transformers today that power Chat GPT was invented in the 80s. They had the math, they had the theory, but the primary bottleneck then was they didn't have computers that were big enough or fast enough or had enough memory.
Yeah.
In fact, when I first got into deep learning in about 2009, I did some back of the napkin calculation to say, when is it going to be that a typical server or a typical computer will be able to run something about a brain size? And I came to roughly the same conclusion that Ray Kurzweil came to, who's a famous inventor and writer about the future, which was about now, about
Yeah.
2025 to 2027, is
Yeah.
when we'll have human-like computers.
Yeah.
Um, I was lucky that my math was that good, but I looked at the same facts and the same trends that everyone else looked at. And when you have that kind of hard data, you say, okay, it's continuing to improve. And this goes back to the normalcy bias. Many people, even those who have been in technology for a long time, several decades, I remember the first computer I installed had 64 megabytes of memory, and today your watch has more memory than that. So uh, that has been improving for a long period of time. So then you say, well, what's the maximum intelligence? What's the maximum density we can get to?
Yeah.
one example that we have is the human brain. So the human brain runs on about 20 watts of energy. And it is, as best we can figure, at least a million times more efficient than the best supercomputers today. However, what I'll point out is every time we come up with a new class of supercomputer, the human brain is still about a million times more efficient than that computer because we discover more about the brain. We discover more about how the brain computes. So that's why I say it's at least a million times more efficient, which is several orders of magnitude beyond where we're at today, or where Moore's law will take us in about 10 to 20 years. So there's really no ceiling in terms of physics has already produced human brains. It goes even further than that, though. There's a principle called Landauer's limit, which is the actual physical, the least amount of physical energy that is required to perform a computation. And human brains are about a million to a billion times less efficient than the Landauer limit, meaning we could hypothetically create computers in the future that are trillions to quadrillions of times more efficient than they are today, in terms of how much processing power you can squeeze per every watt of energy that you put into it. So from a physics perspective, there is no functional limit that is anywhere near the near-term horizon, meaning we can expect Moore's law and its equivalent derivatives to continue for several decades at least, meaning that in about 40 to 50 years, your smartwatch will be able to run the smartest AI that we have today.
Yeah.
So you could run GPT-5 on your Garmin, version 80, if a
Yeah.
Garmin
Yeah.
is still around.
Yeah, absolutely. So this technically means that we are heading in, or maybe as of yesterday, we maybe already are in the cognitive hyperabundance reality. Yeah.
Yes, and it's only going to get cheaper. So this is one of the things about general purpose technologies is they tend to get cheaper and better over time. And it's not just better as like it gets better at doing the one thing that you built it to do. If it's a single purpose technology like an engine, you can make a V12 engine or a turbocharged engine and it gets better and more efficient. But if it's a general purpose technology like artificial intelligence that has cognition, it's not just that it gets better at doing the things that it does today. It starts being able to do entirely new classes of things as it continues to expand. So electricity is more like that, as a historical example, whereas initially electricity was used for basically telegraphs and lights. And
Yeah.
then we had to figure out, oh wait, you can use electricity for radio waves, you can use electricity for electric motors,
Yeah.
and now we can use it for even more things. So as these really good general purpose technologies advance, they don't just get better at the first thing that they do, they proliferate very quickly. And that's what we're seeing. That's what we're seeing today with artificial intelligence.
Yeah. And we are on the cusp of self-improvement, or of the AI systems, and as we've all learned earlier this week with OpenAI making their open weights model available freely to anyone on Earth. We now technically have a potential for every living person on Earth to have access to super, well, I'm not going to call it super intelligence, but to have access to a PhD level friend in their pocket on any topic. And this is shocking, actually. And you just
Yep.
described that this is day two, right?
Yeah.
This continues exponentially.
Yep.
And we technically probably could say that we are at the point where cognitive hyperabundance is upon us. I don't know what
Yes.
else would this should be, how else would describe today than cognitive hyperabundance upon us. So David, this sort of concludes the first part of the book, the rise of automation. We have a couple of interesting questions. I'm not sure if are you okay to proceed a few more for a few
Yeah.
more minutes?
Oh yeah. Yeah. We can hit me up with the expert level questions.
Alrighty. So there is one that actually came from Pranshu in the audience. He asks, do you think that as the fourth industrial revolution diffuses over the decade from the Western world to the third world, will there be a massive reverse brain drain through the labor refugees? I'm going to assume labor refugees from the Western nations or the more developed nations into the third world. How would you react to that? That's a great question.
Yeah, I get this kind of question a lot, and it's actually the evidence that we have seen is not intuitive. So, at least until you explain it. So, one of the first order effects is some of the jobs being lost are offshore workers.
Mm.
So one anecdote, and again, the data is still very scarce because we're very new. Some of the anecdotes out there are showing that particularly remote workers in India, Thailand, Vietnam, Ukraine, Russia, those sorts of things, they are being replaced first because it's easier to let go of contractors over there. And Native American English speaking people are able to use these latest AI tools to replace their coworkers. And that doesn't get reported. That's not even a layoff. That is an
Hmm.
OpEx line item that gets removed. So
That's a
that
very
is
good point. Yeah.
right. So that's one of the first things that we're seeing. So we are seeing kind of a not a brain drain, but almost a demarcation. And because the thing is, it's not even reshoring. It's not hiring someone on American soil. It's just getting rid of the job globally.
Yeah.
So that's one of the things that we're seeing. Now, the other thing though is that AI is getting so cheap to the point that it raises the floor very quickly. So chatbots are still working on diffusing and saturating the world. However, when you look at medical image analyzers, they're getting deployed fastest in places like rural India because, as people in those regions tell me, anything that can help, whether it is ChatGPT to help teach or medical images to, because if you don't have a doctor in a village but you have an internet connection, you functionally have a doctor.
Yeah.
So developing nations, I prefer to say developing nations because third world I think is kind of an archaic term.
Yeah.
But developing nations, because the price point is getting so low, they're able to adopt these things very quickly and it has an outsized impact. So I've worked with a lot of educators and it's interesting. The first world problem of AI and education is how do we grade? That's the thing that professors care about
Yeah.
and universities care about in the developed world. But in the developing world, they're like, this is the best thing ever. It's helping us learn. It's filling in so many gaps. And so that's the leapfrog effect that has been observed many times with other technologies where
Yeah.
developing nations often go from mud roads to satellite
Yeah.
internet in one generation.
Correct.
So it's again, it's not intuitive, but when you look at the evidence, the pattern is repeating itself, and artificial intelligence is no different this time.
In other words, um, it almost feels like that every nation will need to bootstrap itself into this. And
It
those
could.
who are at the forefront are going to dominate and win. And those who are behind need to very quickly mobilize and focus on investments into their infrastructure and bootstrapping their people to come up with innovations and ideas and so on. Is that kind of how you think this might be evolving? Like
That would be,
more independent nations like entering the competition. What do you think about that?
yeah, I think that there are certainly people working towards that. So, Emad Mostak, over at, he was formerly of Stability AI. I don't remember the name of his current company. But that's one of the things that he's working on is how do you democratize artificial intelligence globally?
Globally, yeah.
Now, this is one of the reasons why OpenAI ultimately released GPT OSS, which is their open source version. And it's another reason that China releases so many open source models as well. Now, this is not necessarily out of a sense of benevolence or from the goodness of their hearts, although many of them do have a good mission, but it is also to make sure that these developing nations start using their technology now, even
Yeah.
before they can afford the high-end stuff.
Yes.
Uh, but at the same time, open source is only about 6 months behind the flagship frontier closed source models. China has demonstrated repeatedly that sometimes within a few weeks of
Yeah.
OpenAI releasing a new model, China has duplicated it. Now, you might say, well, they're just stealing it. In some cases, yes. In some cases, no. But one of the and the reason I'm bringing this up is because one of the most interesting things about this technology is it is intrinsically democratic. It is the
Yeah.
most portable technology because a file that's only a few gigabytes or a few hundred megabytes is intelligence that you can run on a phone. We have never seen a technology that is this disruptive also be that portable. where you just copy paste a few files, and if you have a
Yeah,
computer powerful enough, you can run it.
yeah. And yeah, people describe this new, well, AI as the equivalent of modern equivalent of electricity. I would even go a step further now that I've seen what has happened earlier this week. I will say, like, we are entering the time where AI is going to be like air. It's going to be everywhere, untethered across the world. And everyone who has access to, very soon, very affordable local device will have access to super intelligence in their pocket. This is
Oh
game
yeah.
changer like we've never had. Um, Now, thank you for that, David. A couple of more questions I want to ask, like as you call them, the expert level questions. Um, One is the emergence of these superstar firms. I think many people have heard that we now are expecting to see perhaps a solopreneur, a one person billion-dollar business. Some of the highlights that we already know of would be, Instagram that, has 13 employees and 30 million users, or WhatsApp that has like 55 employees and serves 450 million users. That really just demonstrates the digital scalability here. How do these superstar business models alter the economic power structures compared to the traditional labor intensive industries?
Yeah, great question. And one of the ways to understand this is where what you're seeing is what's called capital intensification, which
Mm,
means that capital becomes more valuable than labor. Whereas before, some of these the Magnificent Seven stocks, they're all tech
yeah,
companies.
yeah,
The biggest companies during the 40s and 50s and 60s were companies like Coca-Cola, right? Brand companies that had and GM, General Motors, they had a huge workforce footprint because it was not as scalable. They were still anchored a lot in the physical space, heavy materials, heavy machines, lots of people to operate and move those materials and machines. You just couldn't scale them in the same way that you can with a couple dozen or a few dozen less than 100 employees and reach most of the planet. Even OpenAI has I think they have a couple thousand employees now, but they have a billion users.
yeah.
In a previous time, that would not have been simply possible. But this is exactly what you expect to see with the rise of automation, which is fewer man hours, larger impact. So that's actually a good sign. That actually means that humanity is getting better at automating things, but it does necessitate that we renegotiate that capital intensification, because that also leads to another phenomenon called capital concentration, meaning the
Hmm.
people who own those businesses own the lion's share of everything productive. In fact, the World Economic Forum for a few years has had the mantra of they see everything moving towards a rentier economy where everything is a subscription, and they say you will own nothing and be happy. But that's really the opposite of what we need to do. We need to
Yes.
actually broaden ownership. Otherwise, people aren't going to have jobs and they're not going to have any income, so they're not going to be able to pay for these goods and services that are going to be cheaper.
And
So
yeah,
that's kind of what the superstar firms tell us. It's a clue to the future.
I think this is also a very important moment to mention something about the post-labor economics model that you are coming up with and that we are discussing here, is that like this is not the communism. This is not what the model is emerging, and the frameworks that you are proposing are actually, I would call them capitalism 2.0. It's how do we actually move from labor arbitrage as the primary source of income to ownership rights of the population as the source of income. So it's not like we're not pitching here, everybody, oh, stay in bed, government will keep you alive. What we are saying, we have an opportunity to reimagine capitalism differently. And instead of, handing out money, get everybody to participate as co-owners, right, of the assets. And so this is, I think, really important because I'm sure that you get a lot of criticism from people who fail to delve deeper in saying, oh, you're pitching, we've seen this before. It's a version of socialism, communism, Marxism, and this is a catastrophe. So it's not.
Right. We want to do the opposite of central management and central ownership. Now,
Bingo.
with that being said, there is an asterisk because within post-labor economics, I do advocate for a few things like universal basic income, universal basic services, and some sovereign wealth funds, which is technically a socialized, maybe not full socialist scheme, but where the state does own some assets and uses that wealth to help prop up the
Yeah.
citizens.
Yeah.
But that should not be the mainstay of the economy.
That's right. That's right.
The mainstay of the economy should be market-based and property-based. So in that respect, we're not making really any dramatic changes. It's just a matter of how do we make sure that people can participate in that new capitalism 2.0, or what some other people call hypercapitalism? Because if labor goes away as a meaningful way of getting money, then everything is capital. That is the nature of capital intensification.
Yeah. So this is fascinating. Of course, I can't wait to delve deeper into those topics. On the super firm or a superstar firm front, um, the theory obviously suggests that full automation implies that there will be lights out factories. We already have lights out factories actually working, but that the ultimate number of employees for a firm, optimal number is technically zero, right? So we are not I'm expecting, yes, that there will be new entrants, solopreneurs who will build $1 billion businesses, but I wouldn't be surprised to see that there are some existing organizations that are $1 billion companies that end up being down to the owner. That's it.
Yeah. Yeah, this is something that when you kind of look at the numbers and you say, well, why do companies hire employees? Companies don't hire employees out of a sense of charity or anything other than they have to.
Yeah.
They hire an employee either for regulatory reasons. You need someone to file taxes, or you need someone to be on the hook for certain decisions, or you need that person to get the job done. Those are kind of the two primary
Yeah.
reasons. Now, if you ultimately erode and slowly eliminate the need for every employee at every level, you can fire more and more people. And in fact, we're seeing kind of the beginning of this where some of the bigger companies, Microsoft, IBM, Google, and others, are starting to let go of not only their entry level people, but some of their middle management as well, because they're realizing that they're finding more and more efficiencies. The fewer people you have to manage, the fewer managers you need. And if that cycle continues, now obviously we don't want to overpromise, because offshoring promised to eliminate, all headcount domestically, but
Didn't work out.
reshoring started before even artificial intelligence. But at the same time, if every company is competing with every other company, then when you lay someone off and replace them with AI, so does your competitor. But instead of laying one person off, they lay off two or three people. So then you have to keep up
Yeah.
with them. So we're going to find a new equilibrium, and that new equilibrium is going to be at much, much leaner institutions. Particularly, we haven't even seen the next wave, which is humanoid robots.
Yeah. Yeah.
Once they amortize to about $1 to $3 per hour, they're going to be work tirelessly, not require insurance. They don't quit, and
Yeah.
all they need is some spare parts and some batteries, um, and they'll be smarter than your average worker as well. So before too long, you're going to see very few moats around human labor.
Yeah.
Of course,
And
many people think, oh, go ahead.
I was going to say, and the capitalistic system we have, the free market economy, where every firm is competing openly for survival and prosperity, that capitalistic model, open market, free market, absolutely guarantees that outcome. It guarantees the outcome. That's why I think we need to be talking about this and policy interventions and different ways to think about ownership and so on and so forth before this natural outcome plays itself out. And we end
Yes.
up in a situation where, you know, double digit unemployment comparable to what was happening 100 years ago in the 1920s and 30s. Uh, David, I have two final questions, if you don't mind. One actually is on policy, and the other one is about what might the future scenarios be. Is that okay?
Sure. Yeah.
So many current economic policies are still built on the assumption of, close to full employment as the norm. and governments are sort of calculating this like 4 to 7% is probably the range of good employment. So from the policy design standpoint, what do you think are the most urgent updates needed to reflect the reality where human labor might no longer be the primary driver of productivity?
The absolute first step that any policymaker at any political level needs to focus on is measuring the difference. And fortunately, many people are starting to measure this decoupling. They're looking at, economic performance indexes and other data. For instance, you look at the rise of discouraged workers and marginally attached workers. That's rising sharply this year. The rise
Yeah.
of youth unemployment. Um, we don't yet have a good dashboard or a good metric to really capture this. And in fact, the data can be misleading because with the rise of gig workers, you're actually hiding a lot of people that are either underemployed or otherwise not kind of reaching their maximum potential. And this has been a trend that people are aware of, but there's not really a good measurement. So the absolute first policy change anywhere in the world, this includes America, Europe, anywhere in the OECD, developed nations or developing nations, is to start working on getting better measurements so that we understand who's being impacted, where, and at which rate. So we don't necessarily have good measurements yet. I've got a few ideas, but they're
Hmm.
not battle tested yet. But absolutely, any policy intervention should start with, making sure that we know what's happening on the ground level.
Yeah, yeah, excellent. Thank you for that. For those who are following us, this video, of course, is going to be available on both Tectonic Conversations channel and David, you will post it on your channel. And I will invite you to register for the forthcoming episodes. I will provide the link down in the description so you can quickly register for remaining 5 episodes. And with that, I'm going to ask you the final question, which sort of reflects on the possible futures with what's coming. Um, you're projecting some pretty spectacular numbers like that. Within the next decades or so, we might live with 1 billion humanoid robots amongst us who will be performing all the physical tasks, while cognition task has long since been automated. What are the possible scenarios? What do you think is the best case? What do you think is the worst case societal outcome?
Yeah, let's start with the worst case so that we can end on a higher note.
Yeah.
The worst case scenario is that society and government fails to adapt, and we end up with kind of a runaway freight train scenario of capital concentration and capital intensification, where we end up with what is called in science fiction high tech, low life. The technology will continue to improve, and we end up in that situation of you will own nothing, but you won't be happy because you'll have no leverage,
Yeah.
and you'll have very little income, and people will be scraping by, trying to scratch a living, as best they can from gig work or government handouts, that sort of thing. Uh, one version of that is where we end up with more corporate oligarchy or hegemony. Uh,
Yeah.
Multinational conglomerates kind of end up owning everything, but the entire economy suffers because without consumption, uh, the companies don't have anyone to sell to anymore. So basically, you could end up in a lose-lose scenario where the state loses power, where the people lose power, and also corporations lose power as well because the economy just stalls.
Yeah.
And that is putting the worst case scenario gently. That sort of thing could lead from everything from protests and riots to outright civil war in some cases because
Yeah.
people tolerate a certain level of hardship, but they do not tolerate hardship and powerlessness for prolonged periods of time. Eventually, if you are too hungry or too disempowered, your mental calculus becomes better to turn violent and tear the system down and rebuild it. That's the
Yeah.
worst case scenario.
Yeah, I
Best
agree.
yeah,
Yeah. A
best case
revolution.
scenario. Yeah, revolution of some kind, right?
Yeah.
Whether it's the Tsarist revolution or the Great Leap Forward. Many times throughout history, when you have an economic revolution, even the French Revolution, they're incredibly bloody, and not people.
Yeah.
Nobody wins in that situation. Everyone loses. Things are changed forcibly. Now, the
This
best
is why
case,
we need post-labor economics, and now we're going to see
yes,
where it will take us.
yes. So the best case scenario, if we come up with the right measurements and we start implementing all the correct interventions, and we implement the reforms vigorously as they become means tested. That's one of the primary things is means testing. We're not doing any utopian hand waving away of the difficulty of statecraft and managing the economy, but if we find those correct measurements and we find those correct policy interventions and we implement them vigorously, not just at the national level, but the international level and the regional or state and the city level, because every level of government should be participating, then we could end up in a situation where very few people work, and those who work only do so because they want to, because it's something that they want to do, not because it's something they're compelled to do. And so then people will be free. They'll have enough capital to pursue whatever their dream happens to be, whether they want to be a sculptor or, hike the Appalachian Trail. That's a 2,000-mile long trail on the east coast of America. Whether you want to do that, or if you want to be a tour guide, or whatever it is that you want to do, you'll have the time and energy and capital available to do that. And even for people who want to be entrepreneurs. Now, you're going to be competing against super intelligence, so good luck being an entrepreneur in 15 years. You're going to have to be one sharp cookie in order to carve out a market niche for yourself. But if you want to do it, go for it. And that level of individual liberty and social mobility is really what we should be aiming for. And if we do it right, it will be not equal across the board in force, but everyone will have the same floor, the same kind of bootstrapping capital to make sure that they get their basic needs met, to make sure that they're not, at risk of being homeless or hungry, to make sure that they have health care. But then there's going to also be ways for everyone to participate in this market-based capitalism 2.0. So if you do want to build wealth, you won't need to, but if you want to, because let's say you dream of having a yacht and you want to go around the Caribbean or the Mediterranean, you can still work towards that, because
Yeah.
the last thing we want is to create a system where nobody has economic agency, regardless of how hardworking or smart they are.
Yeah. Economic agency, you touched on the another principle that I can't wait for the next week or next 2 weeks to delve deeper into it. So in other words, we are now in the in a junction, and it is up to us to decide. Do we move ourselves towards this Star Trek vision of the, solar punk, beautiful future, the age of abundance, with people actually still have economic agency and they can deploy that agency to better themselves and their families and communities? Or do we not do that and let this flow and take us into the Elysium dystopian future?
Yeah.
This is the task, I think, of our generation. In my mind, this is probably the most important task in front of humanity, because this impacts all of us, regardless of whether we happen to be born in China or United States or Canada, Serbia, Korea. All of us together actually are going through this, and it's unfolding at the same time. So I think it is super important that we reach out across the globe, connect to people who have the right mindset, who understand the risk and also understand the opportunity. This is
Yes.
why we are all doing this. This is why we're having these conversations. David, thank you so very much. And for the audience members, please subscribe to David's channel to learn more. Subscribe to Tectonic Conversations. Register for the future episodes. Thank you very much for your attention, David. Thank you for your time. See you soon.
Thank you so much. Take care.
Bye bye.